Westbrook on LeBron. LeBron ate it up at the rim. Wow, he got some bounce in those 35-year-old legs.
Whose game is it? It's Michael Jordan's game.
Have it. 6 to play. Booker. This is for the win. Got it. Basis. So Kobe will dunk, and then so will the other two. Then they'll do it one more time. Oh, between the legs. Got to get it in. Here's Luka. Gets it away. It's gone. A Doncic.
And the brilliance of the young man from Athens. This is the end of an unbelievable era.
Well, first, thanks very much.
Ben Golliver with the Open Floor Podcast.
Hi, I'm Christine Ludlow from NBA Inside Stuff.
I'm OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors.
Hey, I'm Elena Donon, and welcome to the Double Clutch.
Double Clutch.
Double Clutch. Double Clutch.
Double Clutch Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Double Clutch Podcast. I am your regular host, New York Nick Whitfield. And without a hesitation, let's dive straight into Around the Association. So, in the NBA this week, while the Phoenix Suns finally lost after 18 unbeaten games, the Houston Rockets have unexpectedly taken off with the current longest winning streak in the NBA. Not only was this unexpected based on the team's prior performance, but this run has come with the absence of their star rookie, Jalen Green, something to monitor. In everyone's favourite type of news, vaccination news, the nation of Canada has launched a new policy for travelling athletes needing to be vaccinated in order to be allowed into the country. Any players that either are unvaccinated or cannot provide proof of full vaccination will have to miss their games in Toronto. While Raptors fans will be rejoicing this potential new element to their home court advantage, it will no doubt lead to endless and tedious conspiracy theories about who is and isn't vaccinated if players miss games in Toronto for any reason at all. I, for one, will be looking forward to reading these conspiracy theories about as much as the time that as a small child I managed to wedge my own head into the banisters of a Clark's shoe store. In a display of Shaquille O'Neal-esque strength, my dad eventually came to my rescue, pulling the metal banisters just enough that I could free my head. But the emotional and psychological damage was already done. Even the incredible foot measuring machine that anyone of a certain age will remember wasn't quite enough. I don't think I ever stepped into a Clark's again. But anyway, the NBA has preemptively said that players who miss their games in Toronto on account of being unvaccinated will be subject to fines, suspension, or reduced pay, upping the ante on incentives to get vaccinated to any remaining players who aren't. In NBA 2K news, American Express will host a pop-up NBA 2K22 experience December 10th to 12th outside the Staples Center, the Crypto.com Arena in Los Angeles. LA Clippers star Paul George and Seattle Storm star Breanna Stewart will face off in a matchup in their pop-up event that will live stream Friday on the NBA's Twitch channel. In sneaker news, the much anticipated Jordan 11 Cool Greys come out December the 11th. I, along with everyone else, eagerly anticipate being told by an app that I'm not allowed to buy the shoes that I want to buy and the company tells me I should want to buy because of the fake scarcity Nike creates that allows resellers and bots to pick up these shoes with no intention of ever wearing them, only to resell them at disgusting margins. For the culture, indeed. Nike will no doubt soon be holding a press conference with Jacob Rees-Mogg invited, where the whole room is wearing Air Jordan 11 Cool Greys, laughing about the fact no one else was able to obtain Air Jordan 11 Cool Greys. Reluctantly, on with the show. And I am joined this week by someone I used to work with briefly, freelance writer at the time, Lethabo Nxumalo. I'm very aware my pronunciation is terrible. I apologize. You have told me I can refer to you as Lee, so I'm going to do that for the remainder of the show. How is it going?
I'm okay, Omarian virus and everything considered, Manchester United has gone to the UEFA Champions League. So I'm splendid. The Bulls are back, so I'm having a lovely time right now. This is the best time of my life so far.
I also have to make it very clear for listeners that Lee, as a Manchester United and Chicago Bulls fan, me being a Knicks and Arsenal fan is essentially my nemesis.
Quintessentially, yes. We're the worst of enemies. And I make sure to make fun of him every single time either team loses.
So this part of the show is called What is Your Name and Where Do You Come From? So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you right now? What's your background? What do you do?
So right now I'm actually in Cape Town, although I'm based in Johannesburg. I'm a freelance writer and content producer. I got my start in sports writing, weirdly enough, when I was in the United States. I was studying in the States, a Bachelor of Arts in Film and Digital Arts. And I just loved basketball. And I was so happy because I was finally in the country where, the NBA is. And so I used to just chat all the time about basketball. And a friend of mine was like, why don't you just do like an internship or something? So that you can stop talking to us about basketball. Because I was in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh is more of like a American football city. American football, not the real football. Real football is played by grown men. I'm kidding.
And you actually use your feet in it. And you actually use your foot. Yeah.
Exactly. Please tell the Americans that. So my friends used to get so tired of me of talking about like sports all the time. They're like, you should write about it. So I got like an internship at like the Pittsburgh Sports Report. As like, it was literally just an internship, and then they kind of kept me on for like 2 years. And that was my training ground, because that's when I learned, because back then I didn't know anything. I was just like I was a film kid. And so he really taught me how to structure writing. My editor, his name was Tony. I forgot his last name. It's been so many years.
Shout out to Tony.
So he told me the difference. Yeah, shout out to Tony, Pittsburgh Sports Report. I think he still works there. I don't know. So he told me how to write game recaps, how to write features, how to do interviews. Like, he actually got me in front of athletes, really, really young, like college athletes or high school promising athletes. Like, there's one athlete, Miles Sanders. He is a wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles. I interviewed him when he was still in high school, when he was literally still a junior in high school. And I got to interview Bob. But basically, it was my training ground. That's where I learned all the basics and how to like really, fine tune my writing. And then I worked, before I left, I worked for NPR in the United States just for a little bit. And although I was more on the news side of things, I always was trying to get back to the sports elements of it. So they would put me into like a couple of baseball stuff. So it wasn't just basketball I was covering. It was like a whole array of sports, because obviously Pittsburgh is a very much football and baseball oriented town. And so then I left the United States because I was kind of just so tired, because, American culture can really like work you to like a workhorse to the point that you're like on zero. And so I just came back home to kind of like recharge. And I worked at a film production company because obviously that was my degree. But I had a friend of mine who connected me to the guys that worked at Kwezi, because Kwezi had this collaboration or partnership with the NBA, and they needed writers. And I think at the time then, because South Africa it doesn't have like a robust basketball culture back then. That was like 2016, yes. wasn't as robust as it is now. So my friend was like, they're literally looking for basketball writers, and you're the only one that I know. And so I started writing there, and that kind of just opened up the gamut for a whole bunch of other stuff, writing for ESPN, doing stuff for Red Bull. And I've kind of been working, and then I left my job, I think at the film production company that I was working at. I left it in 2017, and then from then on, I've kind of been a freelancer, occasionally doing contract work here and here, but for the most part, freelancing.
And let's go back a little bit. So, because you started your story in the US. Let's go back to growing up in South Africa, and describe our audience is primarily UK based, so we know very little about basketball in South Africa. What's the state of the sport in that country? Because obviously we know about rugby, we know about cricket and football in that country. Where does basketball sit compared to those other sports? It's interesting
that you asked me that, because I literally wrote a whole article that kind of chronicles what happened to basketball within the past decade. Well, I tried to. 3,000 words, you can only say so much. But quintessentially, basketball right now is, it's not great. And part of it has to do with, it's mostly politics, I can say. It's the federation basically hasn't been in great financial health since the late 2010s, and there's been lots of investigations. And obviously those kind of things will get in the way of actual development. I mean, you have things that the NBA has tried to do on their own, with, I know they have the, the Royal Bafokeng program that they have for teaching basketball at a junior level. One of the things the NBA is really trying to focus on is trying to get the skills learned at a young age so that they become more instinctive. Because I think the problem with the Joel Embiids and the Giannis's and the Pascal Siakams, although they're great now, initially what a lot of them struggled with was the fundamentals, because obviously they learn things at a later age. And if you think about a lot of the basketball players that are great today, they started playing basketball at 4 or 5 years old. Whereas if you hear a story about Giannis, or you hear a story about Joel, they started playing at 13, 14 years old. That's a massive gap. So there is things that the NBA is doing here and here, but obviously they can't do it by themselves. I mean, you need to have a culture around the sport, and in order to have a culture, you need to have people invested in it. And I just think the people that could be invested just right now aren't in the space to be. So you have people operating in silos, but I think for it to get to a place where South Africa actually is even competing at an Afrobasket, to be honest, right? Because they're not even competitive on a continental basis. I think it just, people need to work together rather than just in separate silos. Everybody's doing their own thing.
And so in that context then, basketball was a minority sport in South Africa in terms of interest. How was it before you ended up in Pittsburgh, you were already a basketball fan? Was it cultural? Was it a family member? How did you get interested in the NBA and the WNBA and basketball in general?
So my family was generally just a sports type of family. My grandmother used to watch tennis all the time and football, and did sometimes play basketball games if they were on. So I was kind of a casual fan. I had one of my good friends was a huge Lakers fan. He was a Kobe stan. He used to his name was Imedi, and he used to call himself Imedi Bryant because he thought he was the son of Kobe Bryant. And so because of that, I used to hang around with him a lot. And to get to why I became a Bulls fan quintessentially was one day I was at his house and we were just watching it. I think it was Orlando Magic versus the Chicago Bulls. At that time, it was the baby Bulls. I'm talking a fresh-faced Joakim Noah, a fresh-faced Luol Deng. Literally, it might have been Derrick Rose in his rookie year, either rookie or second year. I can't necessarily remember. I have the memory of a fish. But I just remember that moment looking at that team and going, oh, they know how to play nice. I should support them. became a Bulls fan. I was like, oh, they just played a nice game. And my friend was like, no, you should be a Lakers fan because Lakers. And I was like, no, I was trying to be a contrarian to him. So I just picked the Bulls. And then like I did my Wikipedias and I was like, oh, this is a good team. They've won championships, Michael Jordan, all this stuff. And so that's how really I became I had known of Michael Jordan, obviously, but I was never really committed to the sport until that game, where I was like, okay, I'm going to intentionally watch this and actually follow this team.
So we're going to deep dive the Bulls in a moment, but I just want to ask you some more questions about the region and your career path. So one thing that I think is impossible to avoid in this country is football, as big a sport as it is in particular, is making a big effort at the moment to promote and work with more female journalists and presenters and get more female presence in the sport. But one thing that's impossible to avoid is the prejudice from some sections of fan bases towards those females. Is that something you've experienced in your career? Is that the same case in South African sport? What's the case over
Definitely
there?
Definitely more in the football journalism arena. Like that's where you feel marginalized probably the most. Because anytime I enter, because I've done now, like not only do I do basketball now, at this point I actually cover football and cycling. And at least the other sports are somewhat friendly, like they'll tolerate you. But like football can be particularly hostile. No one will say something overtly to you per se, so it's not that egregious. But like it's just the sentiment and like the tone and like certain opportunities and like little things there and there that you can pick up on, that you become very familiar with, and you're like, oh, that's what that is. Oh, okay. And what was the question again? Oh yeah, have I dealt with it before? Yeah, so I've dealt with it aplenty. Depending on the situation or what I want as a goal, whether I deal, because sometimes I really put my foot down and I'm like, I'm not going to deal with this. And I'm fortunate that I am in a position where I can kind of now pick and choose what I want to do. Earlier in my career, that wasn't necessarily the case. And so if situations are just bad, I just really just walk away from them.
And as a organization, group, whatever you want to call Double Clutch, that has a lot of people who contribute either writing wise or on the podcast or whatever, who are kind of at the early stages of their careers in either journalism or sports coverage or anything. What advice would you give those people? And would it differ in any way to aspiring young women?
Okay, so I'll answer the first question. So obviously, like, I'm not going to give corny advice. I'll give things that I wish people had told me. So the first thing is that you're going to have to take rejection as part of the game. It's a hard thing to deal with. There's no one real way to deal with it. Just try do your best. If you feel hurt, cry it out. Like there's been so many times I've just cried for days or weeks on end because I didn't get an opportunity that I was so excited to get. And understand that, for the 1,000 no's you get, there'll be that 1 yes that will be like a career changer. So it's to keep faith even when like it looks really, really bad. You can't be discouraged by one rejection or a couple of rejections. You just kind of have to reconfigure how to move and get to what your goal is. The second piece of advice I would have is second piece of advice is actually to value your network. And that would mean like, because I think when people say that, it's like it takes on a very manipulative tone. And I don't mean manipulate people. What I mean is just treat everybody nicely, just everybody. Because as much as, yes, being a sports writer is all about how well you can write or how well you can articulate yourself. A lot of it is about what the people in your circle can do for you. And you'll be surprised. Like there's so many times in my career where like a person who I met like 2 or 3 years ago, they're like, oh yeah, you did this writing thing and I thought it was really cool and you were really nice. I'm going to link you to this person and you can get this gig. So many of like some of the biggest things that I've done in my career so far have come from that. And it's just really just being nice to people, not necessarily because they can do something for you, but just because, you know, you're a human being and they're human beings and we're all just trying to figure this life stuff out. And it will go a long way. It will go way further sometimes than even your best driving skills. And the last part I'd say is have integrity in the work that you do, and stand up for yourself. Obviously know when to, because obviously, you know, navigating, you know, the sports world and different brands, and you kind of have to be careful that you don't piss off anyone or that you don't do. So never burn bridges with anyone. I always say that. But there is a way to still stand up for yourself, because the problem is that some of these brands or companies will quintessentially take a piss. And because if you don't say anything and if you don't, you know, you just complain at the water cooler that, oh, this person did this, and you never say it to the actual person, then they'll continue with the behavior and you go nowhere and you do nothing. So if you have a vision in mind, there's certain things that you know you won't tolerate, and like you like, this is my limit. And I think that can help a lot with navigating, okay, is this worth it for me, or should I leave? And if you do leave, you leave respectfully. You're like, listen, I didn't like this. I didn't like A, B, C, D. This is how you can become better. And if they take you, great, and it becomes a good working situation. If not, you just leave. And I think then the last part would definitely apply to women a lot more than males, because then in that situation, there'll be a lot of times you come across patronage, and then you have to decide, okay, am I at my wit's end with this? Is this something that I can't deal with? And then how do I navigate that? I'm sorry, that was such a long answer. I tried to be short.
Excellent. No, all good. Enjoyed that and agree with everything. Another topic, excuse me, I was curious to get your opinion on is the Basketball Africa League. It was mentioned in a lot of press releases. Obviously, the league kind of got delayed, the first season to be played for a couple of years because of COVID. What has the reaction and perception within Africa been to that competition?
Weirdly enough, going back to the first question you asked me about, like the state of South African football, the federation actually finally somewhat tried to get its act together, because the BAL now was an opportunity for South African teams, or, you know, African teams to qualify. And so I remember I spoke to the chairman at the time, and he said, what was it about? Because they weren't compliant in a not a survey. What's the word? I'm losing it. They basically weren't compliant, and then because they stood to lose a spot in the BAL or the teams, I think it was the Equally Tigers or something like that. Because they stood to lose a spot in the BAL, they actually course corrected. And I think it's just in terms of continental, not only looking at South Africa, it's just definitely beneficial. It gives legitimacy to the dream of a lot of kids to become basketball players. I think as much as there is a Joel, there is a Pascal who are Basketball Without Borders program kids, you know, they basically came through that channel. It still wasn't a solid way. I think there was no real way for African players to really conceptualize how to make a career out of basketball. And I think BAL kind of offers a venue to be like, hey, you could actually legitimately become a professional and, you know, and do it within the context of this continent and then take it further from there. So I guess it's a great jumping off stage for a lot of African players who don't have the option to go to Europe. Because for the longest time, that was the next best option. Well, if you can't make it in Africa, then just go play Europe and then hedge your bets from then on. But I think now there's like kind of like something. It's not the end all be all. I definitely think there's still a lot more to do in order to actually even get Africa to be competitive in the same way, same level as even like before you even talk about the USA as a Spain or I don't know, Slovenia as we've seen with Luka, but slowly, like baby steps. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Okay, and moving on to your Chicago Bulls.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to start with some historic stuff before we get to this season. So as I was writing these questions, I was correct in my assumption that you're too young to have watched the kind of MJ era Bulls. And how much have you, as a Bulls fan, gone back and watched those highlights, watched those games, read about that team?
So that's literally...
That
was literally one of the first things I used to do after that Bulls versus Orlando Magic game. And it was like, okay, I need to go back into the crate and figure out this team if I'm going to support it. If I'm going to support, I got to do it properly. And obviously, the MJ highlights would obviously pop up. I'll never forget the one that immediately comes to mind, because I remember screaming in the library when I saw it, because I was watching it on school internet. Was when he took that dunk from the free throw line, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is the right team!" And so I chose a team with a legend, and then I read up on it, and then for the longest time I thought, yeah, MJ is, because obviously the rhetoric immediately becomes, oh, MJ is the greatest, and then I was like, my friend was like, but he doesn't even have the most rings, and I was like, what? They're like, yeah, no, Celtics have the most rings, because obviously my friend was the bona fide NBA fan at the time. So then it forced me to like read more into the eras. Like, oh yeah, there was a time where he played Magic Johnson, and there was a time where he played Larry Bird, and kind of just figuring out the chronology of it. So I actually, even before lockdowns, I actually knew quite a lot about MJ, because I had read, extensively about that era specifically. Because to be honest, the Bulls before then, I mean, no, it wasn't.
Was there a feeling coming to be a Bulls fan after that team that you'd kind of already missed the glory days?
I mean, I would have been too young even back then to really truly appreciate. So even if I was a Bulls fan from the moment I was born, I would have been too young to really appreciate what was going on. And I would have been like, it would have just been like, oh, I would have obviously understood that it would have won, but how they would have gone about it, or even the storyline of it, would have flown way past my head. Because I think I'm 28 now, so like 96, I was 3 years old. So I mean, did I even have motor skills at 3 years old? So I mean, no, I think I'm fine. I'm fine with this era. I really am. Like I like the fact that I got a clean slate with watching the baby Bulls, because then the nostalgia didn't hit me as hard, I guess.
And of course, you were able to ship out Eddie Curry at one point to the Knicks, so that helped. Thanks for that. Is there still any legacy, do you think, of, because I think it was definitely true up to a certain point, and personally, I'm not sure it's there anymore, but I feel like for a long time after MJ, his kind of shadow loomed large on that franchise in terms of the pressure for a star who plays in Chicago. The measuring stick is huge in Chicago, because obviously MJ played there. One of the greatest teams we've ever seen in the NBA is the measuring stick for any other Bulls team. Do you think there's anything left of that?
Well, Jerry Reinsdorf is still there, so he's still the owner, and I mean, all the Bulls fans know like how often angry we get with just how he cares more about the Chicago Sox than he does about the Bulls. Even though the Bulls make him more money, that makes no sense to me. And for the longest time, that nostalgia carried on with John Paxson, because John Paxson was pretty much the director of the team, and he's the reason why we had we called him Gar Paxson. It was Gar Forman and John Paxson. And the problem is with that quote-unquote nostalgia is that we held on to those two for too long. And when the team needed shifting and needed, a reset button, those two weren't exactly the best people to do it. And so you had John Paxson, who was too cheap to do anything. That's why I think AK this past, was it the trade? It was the trade when we did the DeMar DeRozan trade. Even though a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, what a scam, you guys got scammed. All the Bulls fans were just like, finally a manager that actually cares about just getting a roster together, who's willing to take risks, who's willing to throw money on the table, not, because honestly, before Jamal or Vukovic, the closest really in terms of the most it spent on a free agent was Carlos Souza.
Who, as we discussed in a previous episode, was very prone to making sounds like a dinosaur.
So they just were very, I think for that reason, those two kept their jobs for a very long time. And even John Paxton, even though technically he's been fired now, he still lurks around in the shadows. But I'm just glad now that he doesn't make any major decisions because, wow, we messed up that Jimmy. I mean, did we win that Jimmy trade? I mean, that's, I guess, still the big question around both fans. Because, I mean, yes, we got Zach LaVine, but quintessentially, they almost ran us to the ground with, brought Jim Boylan. Like, guys, seriously? He's a PE teacher. What was he doing coaching an NBA team? Anyways, yeah, that's my rant. So
I'm going to transition a little bit. And during the darkest points of lockdown for much of the world, one of the biggest treats was The Last Dance coming onto television screens. How was that as a Bulls fan?
It was such a delight because it really was, I think it was such a behind the scenes look into the Bulls. Obviously, some things you kind of know it, but it gave you a lot more context, like a lot more color into things that we didn't have the answers to or didn't know everything. Like, I think everybody knew that the relationship was frail, especially between Jerry Krause, and Phil Jackson, and then hence with the team. But I didn't know it was that. It was the way that MJ was disrespecting that man. I was like, oh.
He took it personally.
It was bad. It was bad. And I don't think there's no, piece of article that I've read that indicated how bad it was. But most of the facts went that I kind of knew about the MJ gambling stuff. I had read about his father. Because obviously by then I was reading a lot of Sam Smith's work, and he's the one that wrote the Jordan Rules. So I was kind of familiar with a lot of those stories because I had read a lot of Sam Smith, and he actually appeared on the docu himself.
And being a Bulls fan, can I assume you fall a certain direction on the very tedious GOAT debate that reemerges on Twitter every single minute of every single day?
I'm actually low-key tired of it. I'm actually not a stance of an MJ fan as you would expect me to be. Like, if somebody were to say LeBron is GOAT, I'm not gonna argue with you. I see the logic as to why. I personally still say it's MJ, just for the simple fact that the impact that not only did he have on the NBA, but like just on how sports. He's completely changed the game in terms of sports marketing and sports branding. And I mean, LeBron has done a lot of things, but I don't think he'll ever have that kind of ripple effect. Like his influence stays within the realm and confines of the NBA. It doesn't go into other sports. Whereas, I mean, for goodness sake, Jordan sponsors a whole PSG team.
He does. And have you seen, and what have you made of Scottie Pippen's recent comments kind of criticizing MJ?
Scottie, I think, is mad, and he has reasons to be. I think the way he's going about it doesn't help him, because no one is going to, by reading all the stuff he said, no one's going to turn around and be like, yeah, Scottie deserves, you don't get accolades from dissing somebody else. No one's going to be like, oh, yeah, well, Scottie was great because, he did this for Jordan and he played through this. Like, you should just say your accolades without having to try to discredit another person. But I guess because he's always just going to face that dilemma of being a little bit in Michael Jordan's shadow. And I think that probably bothers him a bit. So maybe that's where the comments were. Also probably because he didn't like his edit on The Last Dance. And I mean, we know that Jordan had a hand in how that came out. So I understand where he's coming from. I just don't think his what he was trying to do, I don't think it worked.
Okay, and then pushing forward to this current season, one of our listeners, Flying Tortoise, pretty much summed it up where he asked, I'm going to frame it slightly differently, but the first part of this is, what were your expectations coming into this season? And number two, Flying Tortoise's question, are the Bulls back?
The Bulls are definitely back, especially if you consider where they've but I actually am on. If you see on my profile, I have my name as 50 wins Chicago Bulls, and I've had that since the beginning of the season. And even then, I thought I was being super optimistic, but I think that actually wasn't. That wasn't actually. Because
Sorry, folks, some bad Wi-Fi by the sounds of it. So just while we're waiting to get Lee back, one of the things I seem to be in a very big minority is my perception of Pippin's comments, where I always enjoy, and I've said this in our Discord server a million times, hearing players' honest opinions, even if they are counter to the popular narrative. And one of the reasons, I'm very biased as a New York Knicks fan who started watching in the 90s against the MJ Bulls. But one of the things that always annoyed me in that time period was how you essentially, everything was always told from Michael Jordan's perspective. Whether it was like VHS tapes the NBA put out, all the journalists wanting to be best friends with Michael Jordan, so they wrote everything favorably around him. And if you're Pippin and you've dealt with that your whole life, I can imagine that really annoying.
Yes.
Lee,
I don't know what happened there. Sorry.
You're back. No worries.
My camera needs to be on.
All good. I was giving my opinion on Pippin while you caught back up. So let's go into player dissection for the Bulls. I want you to give me your thoughts on Lonzo.
So I wasn't sure what to think of Lonzo at the beginning, but I had read a couple of reports on him and like how he played in New Orleans, that, you know, he's a good facilitator, that he can play defense. And I was like, okay, you know, because especially then before the season started, looking at the roster, I was like, oh, we're not going to be so great on defense. So I was like, okay, he's going to be a great addition in that realm. And honestly, what I'm seeing is not what I expected this from Zach LaVine, obviously, and I even not to this level with DeMar, because I thought maybe he'd be like a 20 a night, but certainly not like what he's doing now. Does he still lead the league in points per game? I think he does. But with Lonzo, I really just think he's doing his role and he's doing it effectively. And it's a far cry from, you know, the reputation that he had kind of created for himself in the Los Angeles Lakers, which I just definitely think it was so good for him to get away from that pressure cooker, because then he just got to develop his game away from the spotlight.
The thing I like about Lonzo is, you mentioned his defense already, but I enjoy, there's so many stat-hungry players in the NBA that what I enjoy about Lonzo is he makes passes even if they're not going to lead to an assist even, but it's the right pass to make. He really does play in the right way, and his three-point shots really improved, which was one of his weird form, and his inconsistent shooting was kind of one of the biggest criticisms of him coming into the league. So I feel like he's kind of fixed the only real issues he had in his game. And Chicago's obviously benefiting.
He's a much needed facilitator for Zach LaVine, because Zach LaVine can't necessarily, I mean, time at times, but he's not the greatest at it. He's better off, you know, not being the primary option on offense, and that's what Jim Boylan was making him do, and it just wasn't bringing out the best in him. And I think that's why we're getting such a top tier performance from Zach. I wouldn't be surprised if he's obviously not going to be a top contender for MVP, but he'll be somewhere. His name is going to get mentioned there. And I do think part of it is because he has the presence of Alonzo Ball and also someone like a DeMar who can take the pressure off of him.
What about Vucevic? He obviously came the prior season as one of the earlier additions to try and kind of form this incredible kind of 6 players really you've got in that starting rotation. What have you seen from him that's impressed you?
I mean, to be fair, when he first came in, I was one of those people that was not happy about that because I felt like we gave up a lot. I also had like a personal connection to Wendell Carter, and we traded him, I think, to Orlando, and I wasn't happy about that. But it turned out to be the right decision. He's seasoned. He really is a presence in the post. He actually held his own against. Why am I going blank? In Denver last night.
Nikola Jokic.
Yes, Jokic. Why am I blanking out? He held his own against Jokic. I mean, granted, the Denver is a bad team, so that win isn't. I know a lot of Bulls fans are like, yeah, we won against Denver 4 in a row. Denver isn't a bad day. But, Jokic, when he was on, he was giving the Bulls a nosebleed because it was only in the fourth quarter where we started ramping things up. So, yeah, I really think I do like what he does. The jury's still out for me in terms of, but for now he works. Like you can't get every player that you want, but we didn't lose that. It wasn't as bad of a move as I thought.
The things I like about how he fits the Chicago team is you have 2 players in DeRozan and Levine who like to get to the bucket, and Vucevic is able to stretch the floor. He's got a nice shooting stroke. He can shoot the 3 ball really well. And so depending on what's happening on each play, he can kind of step out and still be effective compared to like a more traditional big. So I kind of like his fit there. And the other thing I see with him is when he first started getting minutes in Orlando, he would be kind of really up there in the rebounding leaders in the NBA. And that kind of dropped off a little bit as he became the offensive leader for that team. But you're kind of seeing it again now that he's got more of a role with this Bulls team. His rebounding's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and he's such a good veteran presence. I think he will be definitely helpful in the development of like a guy like Ayo Dosunmu, who's doing so amazing. He was such an important player in that game against Denver. I think did he score only 11 points, but he played a full 42 minutes last night because obviously right now the Bulls are really depleted in terms of our roster because 4 players I think have COVID at this point, or at least on COVID protocol. So he really showed out. And I think part of it is because he's got like a veteran person, someone who can get in his ear and be like, okay, don't do this, do that. Because I mean the squad is pretty young if you think about it. So he's such a great veteran presence. In
and what about DeMar DeRozan? He came in, and I think it's mainly because he was in San Antonio and people hadn't been watching him very much. His stock was quite low for someone who's that good, and he's been amazing this season. Has anything surprised you about him?
Dude, the fact that he's the leading scorer right now. Actually, I don't know. I'd have to check, but the last time I checked, which was maybe 2 days ago, he was the leading scorer. That is surprising. I think even, but I definitely didn't think. I know a lot of Bulls fans were upset because they felt like we overpaid for him. I think we gave him 80 mil. Is it 3 years, 80 mil? And a lot of Bulls fans had something to say about that because they felt like we overpaid on him. I think it was the right move because look at him now. The stock is rising. And honestly, what else was in the market? It was it was, yes, there were a lot of guards that were available in the off season, but a lot of them already had their eyes set anywhere else. I think by the time the scrambling was done, it was only like a couple left with like Dennis Schroeder. So I mean, I get it was a lot of money to pay for him, but I think it was worth it in the end because I mean, when Zach Levine has an off night, look who's here, yeah.
And a question from the listeners again. What's your take on Caruso?
Oh, I love Caruso to bits. I still do not understand why the Lakers were willing not to go into tax to keep him. I don't get, because especially now their defense is suffering horrendously without him. Just a high level basketball IQ. I think that's why LeBron loves him so much. Like, he gets it. Like, he can see a play before it happens. He even remembers plays well. Like, he knows he can remember the offensive playbook of different teams, and then he knows how to guard against that. Just one of the best. I would, if he's not contending for a DPOY, I would be shocked. Like, I mean, I guess he's not a big man, but like, my God, because once again, remember, this Bulls team, a lot of people had written us off in terms they really thought we were going to rank on the lower end in terms of defensive ranking. And we're literally one of the best defenses, I think. Last time I checked, we were 6. We're 6 in defense, and I think we were 7th on offense. No, sorry, our offense was better than our defense. Maybe 7th defense, 6. I mean, 7th defense, 6th offense. Basically, he's been such a huge difference maker in that regard. Like, wow, nothing but good things. He's the new hometown hero, even though he's not from Chicago.
And on that note, I'm actually going to move on from Chicago. One of the stories this week was the Indiana Pacers, who look like they are looking to do a bit of a rebuild. And they've made it very clear that Karis LeVert, Sabonis or Miles Turner are all potentially up for grabs in a trade. And so what I wanted to do was, do you have any teams in mind where you think those players would work well? So let's go them through in turn. I'll give you my team and you give me yours. So let's start with Karis LeVert. So for him, I picked out Denver, mostly because with Jamal Murray out, with Michael Porter Jr. now out for the whole season, they really need more scoring, and he is someone who can provide it and continue to provide it. So it's not like he'll only be a short-term solution, but he would also provide that. So for me, Denver is the team that should look at Karis LeVert seriously. How about you?
You know, I was thinking maybe Philly could finally, but then I'd never know if he could. Philly could. I'm not saying Karis for Ben Simmons. There's no universe where that makes sense. But I was thinking Philly could try to do something where they get all 3 in exchange for Ben Simmons. I was just like, at this point, what else are you going to get for Ben? Because Ben wants to leave, and you pretty much put his trade value down to this. But if you're saying individually, I do like the Denver because Denver is depleted. Just trying to think what other team is in desperate need of scoring that I've seen. Maybe Sacramento.
Hard to argue.
Yeah, Sacramento is in a bit of a puddle. I also like or maybe he could be in Memphis, because I know now, isn't John Morant injured, or is it COVID? Oh, okay. I mean, I definitely still think they could use him, perhaps. Yeah, I would say between those 2 teams, if we're not doing a 3 players for 1 player trade to Philly, because that's literally what I thought when I saw that news. It's like, this is the perfect time to trade Ben Simmons, because no one else is gonna. I know they're trying to do the Damian Lillard thing. That's not gonna work.
So Rich Hunt, one of our listeners, has said the Knicks. I don't see it because I don't see the Knicks going for him, and I also don't think the Knicks have what the Pacers would want to rebuild. So I don't see that fit. Let's move on to Sabonis.
Maybe Boston.
Let's move on to Sabonis. So for me, the ideal fit is San Antonio, because they just stick him in all the old sets they used to run for Tim Duncan, and he'd be really good in all of those. He's an international guy. San Antonio does well with international players. Contract-wise, they can make something with Thad Young and filler work as an expiring to free up cap space in Indiana. Depends what they want and if they want more than that. So I've picked San Antonio on that basis. Who have you got for Sabonis?
Loki, I would love him at the Bulls. Like our second bench is like our second bench. What am I saying? Our bench unit is like down to zilch. Like now that we have 4 players out, and even before then, even with all our players healthy, I've always said our second unit is very worrying. Especially come playoff time, I wonder what we're going to do. You know, you can't play Zach 42 minutes. You don't want to time. So I would actually like, but I don't know if he'd be willing to come off the bench. Let me see who else I can think of. I would like him in Minnesota. I think him joining forces up against with Anthony Edwards and Carl Anthony Towns would be so amazing. I think that would be a setup that I think would work for him. They're such a young team. I mean, they're still trying to obviously get back into playoff contention. So I definitely think he could bring his skills there.
Okay, well. And Miles Turner. I think this is an easy one, personally. I think it's the Warriors. I don't think any other team makes quite as much sense, because they are in win mode now. They need to win in the next few years based on Steph Curry's age, Klay Thompson, questionable health coming back. Hopefully he's 100%. Draymond's age. If they don't win another championship in the next 2 or 3 years, they're probably unlikely to. And this is a immediate upgrade at the big position. Indiana's looking to rebuild. They can offer Wiseman plus other stuff. Yeah, for me, it's the Warriors.
Ooh. Would it be in a trade scenario?
Yeah.
So who would you trade him for?
Wiseman plus any of the bench that make the contracts work. I'm not going into that much detail to look at the numbers, but
that would be. Oh gosh, that would be.
The other people who could get involved, because they're, in theory, he is a prototypical. He ticks a lot of boxes for a lot of teams. So just like as I was running through my head, the Thunder makes sense, for example, both for Sabonis and Turner, probably. Because the Thunder have so many assets that they can't even use because they've got so many in terms of draft picks and stuff, that they actually need to have some NBA players on their team. The Hornets, both Sabonis and Turner would be an upgrade for. The Blazers would be fun because for Sabonis in particular, because obviously his dad played there in the 90s. So that would be fun. But yeah, who's your Miles Turner pick?
Oh my gosh, I had it and then I lost it. What was I just thinking of right now? Literally, it was at the tip of my tongue. It wasn't the Heat. Who was I thinking of? Houston. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, I can see that. If they want to get more relevant.
The youngsters. I mean, yeah, at this point, try anything because, right, like, it's not looking good. And also because Houston needs to, well, at least John Wall at this point, they want to get rid of that contract. So, I mean, if they're trying to rebuild, I guess, but I don't know, do you want to rebuild with a big contract? That wouldn't work, because if you're trying to rebuild, you don't want to have like this massive contract, John Wall contract on you. So maybe Houston wouldn't work. What's another team that's in New
I'm going to push you for an answer because we're short on time.
Okay, I'm just going to throw the Boston Celtics because literally I can
throw the anarchy of the Boston Celtics answer, and we'll leave it there. We'll let Celtics fans argue about that one. Okay, moving on to my favourite part of the show. Kirk, hit the music.
Nothing but Knicks silly nonsense.
Okay, So the Bucks recently signed DeMarcus Cousins, whose nickname is obviously Boogie. This has always felt like an ironic nickname to me, based on the constant scowl and angry demeanor that Cousins generally has had on his face during his time in the NBA. Someone named Boogie, I'd personally expect to have a 70s disco character that entered the arena on roller skates, dressed like Clyde Frazier, and called his opponents jive turkeys. So my question to you is, if you could give a current or former basketball player a new nickname, who would you choose and why? And to get us started, I'm going to give you my answers. As I was looking for inspiration, I found one that is apparently a real nickname that I'd never heard before, but was incredible, which is Outback Jesus for Dellavedova. That's an incredible one. Another one I had was Grayson Allen as Cobra Kai, because he feels like he would fit into that gang in the original Karate Kid movie. And my other one is Duncan Robinson as White Chocolate Rain, mainly so we could bring back the viral song from 2007 or whatever it was, every time he hit a three. So if you can give a current or former player a new nickname, who are you choosing?
Whew, off the spot, I can't think. Kyrie Irving doesn't really have a, what is it? Is it Dr. J? No, it's not Dr. J. What's Kyrie's nickname? It's Drew. It's Dr. Drew. Drew or something
Uncle
like
Drew.
that, right? Of that movie. Uncle Drew. But I wanted something cooler for him.
I get that.
And something says Silence Assassin, but that doesn't really work with Kyrie. I'm trying to think of something else. Crossover King is boring. I'm so bad on my feet. I really can't think of anything. I want Kyrie to have a cool name.
Let's leave it there. Kyrie needs a cooler name. Okay. And talking on D, this is where if you're not already a member of our Discord server, do give us an opportunity to make you a member of our Discord server. It's a fun place where we chat hoops all day long. Recent chats included retro games consoles. Is Tyson Fury a Leicester Riders fan or not? And we discussed Paige Becker's injury a little bit. Moving on to listener questions. We're going to have to do some quick fire answers on these ones. Basically, from Elliot, aka Hoopin' and Luton, do you think, and this is mainly for you, what do you think the comparison is between the UK and South Africa in terms of generating more interest for basketball? Because the sport occupies similar space in its relation to like cricket, rugby, football. Do you think there's a comparison there?
Yeah, I definitely do think. I think in terms of the hierarchy, it's not as valued, at least in terms of the traction it has. But I definitely think it's growing in its fan base. Hence why I think the NBA is even trying to do things in the UK. I know in the UK they have the occasional regular season game that.
Don't talk about that. We've lost that to France.
Oh,
it's a touchy subject.
Still. Okay. Well, South Africa in that regard has the NBA Africa games, where it was basically just all the Africa players from Africa or of African origin versus like the NBA players. So I guess in that regard it has things, but there's definitely a fan base and a growing fan base that's very interested in the game and knowing the game, and also just randomly has a lot of Golden State Warrior fans.
And question from Mike Miller. What are your thoughts on the number of players going into COVID protocols and the impact this may have on playing seedings? So my thoughts are, it seems so widespread in the States and all around the world, really, but particularly in the States with their COVID numbers, that I have a feeling it's going to even itself out before the end of the regular season? Because off the top of my head, currently I think it's LaMelo Ball, Terry Rozier, Ja Morant, DeRozan, and a load of the other Bulls. There's so many players out currently because of COVID that I can't think it's going to end there. And I'm just going to have to assume that all teams are going to go through a period where they're missing one or more of the best players. Do you think any differently?
Yeah, no, it's gonna become part and parcel, and I think there's nothing really much they can do. I mean, they can't let players with COVID players. That's not gonna work. So I guess they're doing it the best way they can. I mean, I think it might be worrisome more so like when it comes to like playoffs and like, you know, especially like with more, if you're gonna get like really tightly contested playoff series, you don't want them to get ruined by the fact that KG is out on COVID protocol and now he can't play, you know, the next 2-3 games of a critical series. Like that's gonna win it. So maybe they might consider putting it in a bubble again. I don't know, because I just think that's what's gonna, if at least they carry on like this, that's what's at jeopardy, is that you really could ruin a lot of the, you know, the great playoff rounds that, you know, I mean, how sucky would it be if a Bulls versus Knicks playoff series, which a lot of people think is probably going to be inevitable, whether it's in the first round or second round, like how sucky would it be if you don't have Julius Randle, you don't have a Taj Gibson, you don't have a D Rose, and you don't have Zach LaVine because they're all, it's not going to be fun. So I think there has to be a way to mitigate that in that regard.
And on to our games of the week. For this week, my game of the week is the Warriors at the Sixers at 1:30 a.m. UK time, Saturday night, Sunday morning, depending on how you look at it. And the reason I picked that game is I'm interested to see how with Embiid had a huge game last night, and I'm curious how the Warriors deal with him, because if let's say the Sixers win and Embiid has a huge game, it may further incentivize the Warriors to make a trade like for a Miles Turner to kind of cement their how they go up against big teams. So I'm curious to watch that. Did you have a game of the week to look out for?
Oh, game to look out for. I haven't seen the schedule for this week, to be honest. What is the Bulls play? I think we've got the Heat coming up soon. I know we have Cleveland next, but Cleveland were pretty much without most of our players again. I mean, I'm intrigued to see the Heat game again because we lost to them, and so I think now with like, it was on the road trip that we lost, and I think we were running out of gas. Was it a road trip? Yes, it was. Yes, it was a road trip. No. Jimmy came home. I'm lying. Jimmy came home. But we lost that game. I'm curious to see what adjustments Billy Donovan has made to better counteract. Yeah, sorry, I haven't actually been paying attention to the NBA schedule this week because I'm so excited about football. Football is like, there's UEFA Women's and UEFA and PL, so I haven't been tuned in. I know I watched the games from last week, though. I was excited about Boston versus Portland because obviously that was Ime Udoka's homecoming, so I wanted just to see how he was going to handle that. They grabbed a win, but then they lost to the Lakers, which, whew, the Lakers is definitely a story this season.
And we have, for the final segment, we look at the games that are tipping off early this weekend, just because they're UK-friendly tip-off times, and we like to give the viewers something to potentially look out for in each of these games. So on Saturday, we're actually blessed with 2 early tip-off games this weekend. So Saturday, we have the Magic at the Clippers, 8:30 p.m. UK tip-off. I think in that game, I'm curious as to whether Gary Harris actually he started off very quiet this season, is actually picked up. Cole Anthony started the season on fire. I'm curious for the Magic to have a chance in that game. I feel like those 2 guys need to try and match what the production they're getting from Paul George and Reggie Jackson, because if they can't do that, I'm not sure the Magic are scoring enough points to beat the Clippers. Is there anything you'd point out for the viewers to look out for in that game?
I agree with you. It's Paul George. I think, Shane, the Clippers have really bounced. They really performed better than expected, considering that, Kawhi Leonard is out and we don't even know when his, time when he's expected to return. So I think Paul George has definitely held the fort a lot more than I expected. I mean, we know he did this in Indiana because he was the main guy there. But ever since then, he's kind of played a secondary role. So it's interesting to see him kind of be, taking over as the main guy now in the Clippers. So he's definitely the one to look out for.
And on Sunday we have the Bucks at the Knicks, 5 p.m. UK tip-off time. Ooh. So this is a difficult one as a Knicks fan to pull out something constructive here, just because I feel like we're going to get a beat down probably. Do you have anything to look out for in this game? Be gentle with your Knicks slander, please.
I'm curious to see. James Harden has had a very interesting. Oh, why am I saying James Harden? Shoot, it's Bucks, not Boston. Sorry, not Brooklyn Nets. My head is everywhere. It's interesting to see how the Knicks will move on now that they don't have Kemba Walker starting. I mean, I haven't watched the game since. To be fair, I haven't watched a lot of Knicks games other than when they play the Bulls. But I'm interested to see how that goes. I wonder what Tibbs is thinking. I wonder what that also means for Kemba in the long haul. I mean, I definitely still think he's a good point guard. I'm perhaps not understanding the decision why. So I'm interested. So who's starting instead of Kemba now?
Alec Burks.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I'd definitely be watching that really to see what Thibodeau is really trying to do there.
Yeah, Derrick Rose plays more minutes in a lot of games, but Alec Burks often starts. Shifting attention away from a game the Knicks are likely to lose, we come to the end of the show. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lee. Any final messages?
Balls up. That's what we really have to say. Jump in on the bandwagon. I don't mind casual fans jumping on the bandwagon. The more the merrier.
And where can people find you on social media?
At Lee Writes a Lot on all my socials. Yeah, basically that's it.
So thank you everyone for watching along live if you've done that, or for listening after the fact if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast. Please do review our podcast. I was looking at some really old reviews recently and they were really nice. So if you have not left us a podcast review, please do. It helps us. It doesn't cost you anything other than time, and we will love you dearly for it. If you don't already, follow us on social at Double Clutch UK across all the social platforms. Join our Discord, as I mentioned already. Thank you for new Twitch follow. WNBA Nation, really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Hopefully get some more WNBA content on here soon as we get nearer the WNBA season. And don't forget, if you're watching on Twitch, don't forget you can subscribe for free if you have Amazon Prime, and it helps us out and it doesn't cost you anything. So thank you very much, and for another week we're done. I'll see you next Wednesday. Well, we will be chatting all things British basketball.
I must find some way to keep Christmas from coming.
Oh, dope. That is great.